Welcome to my channel. I'm Nancy Thompson, your storyteller, bringing you Americanized spins on classic folk tales, gripping mysteries, and more. Stick around for today's story, set in a quiet, rugged corner of colonial America. Think early 1700s, deep in the Appalachian Hills. In a small, isolated mountain hamlet called Willow Hollow, a young woman named Susanna, Sue Travers, couldn't sleep. All night, she hid under her quilt, tears soaking the fabric. Her husband, James, had just made a heart-wrenching decision. At dawn, she dragged herself to the kitchen, stoking the fire to cook a pot of porridge. It was the last meal she'd prepare for herself, her son, and her daughter. You see, James had been struck down with a brutal lung infection, tuberculosis. Folks called it consumption back then. He knew he didn't have long. Rather than leave his kids to suffer alone in this harsh world, stared at by nosy neighbors or sold off to toil as servants, James figured it'd be better to take them with him. One final act, he thought. Together, they'd cross over and start anew in whatever came next. Sure, people say life's just a fleeting season, like leaves falling in autumn, but Sue couldn't shake the bitterness. Why had fate dealt her such a rotten hand? So what exactly had Sue Travers been through to end up here, ready to end it all with her two kids? Let's rewind a bit. Sue was once the belle of a well-off family in the nearest trading post town, Fairview. She'd married James Travers, a dashing young man from another prosperous clan. They were smitten, head over heels, respectful to his folks, and tight with his younger brother Tom. Everything seemed perfect. But that happiness didn't last. James, always sturdy as an oak, suddenly took ill and passed away, or so everyone thought. Left to hold up the family's sprawling farmstead, Sue raised their two boys alone. Eventually, both grew up, married, and settled into their own lives. She was ready to kick back, enjoy her grandkids, especially from Tom and his wife Clara. But Clara had other ideas. She branded Sue a jinx, whispering that her mother-in-law's death and James's early grave were Sue's fault. Sue Travers had been promised to James Travers since they were kids. Back in Fairview, they were the talk of the town. Two young sweethearts, thick as thieves, riding horses through the meadows and dreaming of a future together. Folks called it a match made in heaven, a real green sapling romance. But when James hit 16 and wanted to tie the knot, tragedy struck. Sue's aging parents passed away within months of each other. Local customs held firm, no weddings during mourning. So James waited until he was 20, and only then did he bring Sue home as his bride, 2 years after his younger brother Tom had already wed Clara. Their honeymoon phase barely lasted 6 months. James, always the picture of health, dropped dead one crisp fall day, or so it seemed. No warning, no explanation, just gone. Clara wasted no time pointing fingers. "Sue's a curse," she hissed to anyone who'd listen. Her folks keeled over. "Now James? She's bad news." The Travers family, once a tight-knit crew, started unraveling. Tom and Clara squabbled non-stop, pushing to split the farmstead. James had been the glue, a dutiful son who'd sworn to his dying parents he'd keep the family whole. Even in death, his will lingered. Tom couldn't bring himself to defy that final wish, at least not outright. Clara, though, had a workaround. "Fine, don't split the land," she snapped, "but get that no-good widow out of here. Who knows what she'll bring down on us next." Tom, torn between his brother's memory and his wife's venom, caved halfway. He begged Sue to head back to her folks' old place in Fairview for a spell, just to cool things off. Sue adored James too much to make waves. She didn't want Tom caught in the crossfire. So she packed up and left, heart heavy but head high. It wasn't long before disaster struck again. James, or what was left of him, had gone off on a trading run through the mountains. Word came back he'd been ambushed, bandits or a bear, no one knew for sure. All they found was a blood-soaked coat. Sue, gutted, wanted to return to Willow Hollow, tend his grave, and honor her husband's memory. But Tom and Clara barred the door. "Stay away," they warned. "You're a walking hex." Sue's own kin in Fairview weren't much kinder. Her two brothers, now running the family trade, turned her away. "No room for a jinx here," they grumbled. Even her sister shut the gate. Homeless, hopeless, Sue hit rock bottom. That's when she found out she was pregnant, James's last gift to her. For that unborn child, for his bloodline, she resolved to keep going. But a lone woman, big with child, in the wilds of Appalachia? How'd she survive? They say a mother's strength kicks in when the chips are down. Sue remembered old Mary Lister, her mama's loyal housekeeper from way back. Mary had been a runaway teen during a lean year, taken in by Sue's kind-hearted mother, fed, and raised upright. She'd even married a local fella and stayed on as Sue's nanny. That kind of bond doesn't fade. After Sue married James, Mary was getting on in years. Sue, ever thoughtful, knew the old woman be picked on if she stayed in Fairview. So she handed Mary $50 silver and sent her off to retire with her son in the hills. When Mary heard Sue's tale, widowed, pregnant, and cast out, she broke down, hugging her tight. She couldn't fix the past, but she could offer a roof. Thing was, Mary's pockets were empty now, her silver long gone. She scraped by on mending and odd jobs. Where'd the money go? Sue asked, desperate. Tears welled in Mary's eyes. My husband passed years back, she said. I gave the cash to my boy, he was peddling goods in town. Him and his wife were sweet to me at first, but once they had the money, they booted me out. Told me to earn my keep elsewhere. Too ashamed to go back, I settled here. Guess I thought I could fend for myself. Two broken women, clinging to each other, wept in that rickety cabin. That's where Sue's fight for survival began anew. A few months later, Sue gave birth to a strapping baby boy, Jimmy Travers, named after his daddy. Life in Mary Lister's rundown cabin was tough as nails. They barely scraped by, patching clothes and trading what little they could. But watching Jimmy grow, his chubby cheeks lighting up the dim room, made every ache worth it. Sue'd look at him and think, even if I'm worn to the bone, this little guy's my reason to keep going. Then when Jimmy was 6 months old, fate tossed Sue another curveball. An old woman, a wandering granny, handed her a scrawny baby girl, Minnie, saying she'd been orphaned in a typhoid outbreak down the valley. Sue took her in, no questions asked. 10 years flew by in a blink. Jimmy and Minnie hit 10 years old, sharp as tacks and eager to pitch in. Jimmy herded cattle for a local farmer, while Minnie tended the chickens, fed the ducks, and even tried her hand at weaving burlap sacks. They were a team, keeping the cabin afloat. But trouble was brewing. Mary's no-good son, Hank Lister, started sniffing around. He'd show up pretending to check on his ma, all smiles and crocodile tears, but Sue caught the glint in his eye. Behind closed doors, he'd whisper to Mary, "Ma, why don't you talk Sue into letting me take the kids? I'll haul 'em to Fairview, sell Jimmy as a farmhand, Minnie as a housemaid. Easy money." Mary, bless her, wouldn't hear it. She'd raised Sue like her own and saw those kids as kin. "Over my dead body," she'd snap, chasing him off with a broom. Sue got wind of Hank's scheme and was fit to be tied. Worse yet, her cough had turned ugly, rattling, wet, and relentless. The village doc called it consumption, same as James. She knew her days were numbered. Pacing the cabin, she thought, what happens to Jimmy and Minnie if I'm gone? Left to rot in this world, worked to death, or snatched by Hank? The answer hit her like a thunderclap. Better they go with her than suffer alone. The porridge was ready by dawn. Sue ladled it into 4 bowls, 3 laced with a bitter herb she'd ground up, enough to send them all to sleep forever. She steeled herself, hands trembling. Suddenly, a knock rattled the kitchen door. Folks in Willow Hollow steered clear of her, whispering about the sick widow. Who'd dare come knocking? Sue cracked the door. There stood an old woman, white hair like snow, leaning on a crooked cane, a chipped bowl in her gnarled hand. A beggar, plain as day. "Miss," the granny rasped, "I ain't eaten in days. I see you've got porridge on the table. Spare a bowl for an old soul." Sue frose. The only safe bowl was meant for Mary. For the first time, Sue turned a beggar away. "I can't," she muttered, voice tight. But the old woman wouldn't budge. "Please, just a taste," she pressed, hobbling inside toward the table. Panicked, Sue grabbed Mary's bowl, the clean one, and thrust it at her. The granny slurped it down, steam and all, then reached for another. "No!" Sue shouted, snatching a poisoned bowl and smashing it to the floor. The old woman blinked, unfazed, and went for another. "Stop, you can't drink that!" Sue cried, shattering the last 2 bowls in a frenzy. Shards and porridge splattered the dirt floor. The granny straightened up, fixing Sue with a hard stare. "Girl, why waste good food like that? Too stingy to share with a poor old thing like me." Her words cut deep, stirring something in Sue's chest. Then it clicked. 10 years back, This same woman had given her Minnie, promising, "Raise her right, and you'll see riches someday." Sue's eyes widened. "You're her, ain't you? The one who saved my kids," she sobbed, falling to her knees. Sue crumpled to the floor, tears streaming as she clutched the old woman's ragged hem. "You're the one who gave me Minnie. Please save my kids, I'm begging you." The granny sighed, her weathered face softening. "Sue Travers, why so quick to give up? If I hadn't shown up, you'd have done something awful by now." "Awful's all I got left," Sue choked out. "I ain't never hurt a soul, but life's crushed me flat. This cough's eating me alive, consumption's got me cornered. What else can I do?" The granny's eyes narrowed. "You came from somewhere, didn't you? Go back there. That's your home, even if they ran you off." "Home." Sue laughed bitterly. "Me and 2 kids, half dead on the trail? Even if I made it, Tom and Clara'd sooner spit on me than take us in." The granny pulled a small clay vial from her shawl. "Drink this," she said, pressing it into Sue's hand. "You'll have the strength. Go back, they'll come looking for you anyway." Sue stared at the vial, then downed it in one gulp. A warmth spread through her chest, her ragged breathing easing like a miracle. She blinked, the granny was gone, vanished like smoke. On the table, 4 steaming bowls of porridge appeared, brimming with wild greens and bits of venison jerky, the smell filling the cabin. "The broken bowls on the floor? Good as new." A whisper brushed Sue's ear. "Good begets good, evil gets its due. The time ain't ripe yet, but it's coming. Go home, claim what's yours." Just then, Minnie shuffled in, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Ma, who you talking to?" "You're sick. Where Epsilon ain't you resting?" She stopped short, staring. "Ma, your face, it's rosy. You're better." Sue fumbled for words. Yeah, Minnie. I'm fixed up. Had a dream last night. A fairy woman gave me a tonic." "Woke abreites rein." Minnie's face lit up. "Jimmy. Ma's cured, come see." "She bolted off, hollering." Soon Jimmy and Mary Lister burst in, gaping at Sue. The 4 of them, once a ragtag bunch, hugged and laughed, a family reborn. Sue felt the weight lift, but a shadow lingered. Hank Lister, Mary's snake of a son, still had his eye on selling the kids. The granny said to go back, take what's hers, but face Tom and Clara again? Sue wasn't so sure. Her body was healed, her spirit half mended. Why tangle with that nest of vipers? She could raise Jimmy and Minnie here, free and clear. Tom and Clara, she'd heard, hadn't had kids of their own, barren as a dry creek. If they ever got desperate, they might claim Jimmy as a Travers heir. Better to stay put, keep Hank at arm's length. He wouldn't dare snatch them outright, not with Mary around. By noon, though, trouble rode in. Hank swaggered into the yard with a posse of roughnecks. Mary, basking in the sun, spotted him and flew into a rage. "You filthy cur. After Jimmy and Minnie again? You'll have to kill me first." Hank grinned, slick as oil. "Ma, relax. Ain't me this time. It's Tom Travers, says he's here to fetch his kin Jimmy, the Travers bloodline. You can't stop that." Sue stormed out, fists clenched. "Tom? You've got some nerve. Y'all drove me out, left me for dead, now you want my boy." Tom stepped forward, all false charm. "Sue, don't be like that. When James was alive, we never cast you off. You're still family. Jimmy's a Travers, I'm here to bring him home. I messed up back then, listening to Clara's nonsense. I'm sorry. Come back, I'll look after you, like James would have wanted. Jimmy's set to inherit the farm someday." Sue's mind raced. The granny's words echoed, "They'll come looking." Here they were, sure enough. But was Tom for real? She didn't trust him an inch. "No dice," she shot back. "We're fine here." Too late, Tom had brought the county sheriff. "If you won't come willing," he said, "we'll take Jimmy by law. He's Travers' blood." Helpless, Sue had no choice. She packed up, leaving Mary behind. Mary wouldn't budge from her cabin. Tom hauled Sue, Jimmy, and Minnie back to Willow Hollow. Clara greeted them with a syrupy smile. "Sue, we've put you through hell. My fault, I was wrong. Forgive me." She'd even set up rooms and a maid. Sue didn't buy it. Snakes don't shed their fangs, she thought, keeping the kids close. That night, a strange scent wafted through their room. Sue's head spun. She and the kids passed out cold.
Sue giolte da wake, heart pounding.
Her wrists burned, rope bit into them tight. Jimmy and Minnie whimpered beside her, gagged with rags, their hands bound too. The room was dim, lit by a flickering lantern. Tom Travers loomed over them, a cold smirk on his face, flanked by Clara, their hired man Buck, and Hank Lister. Knives glinted in their hands, except Clara's. Sue thrashed, but the ropes held fast. Tom chuckled. Calm down, Sue. Play nice, keep quiet, and you'll walk out of this.
Sue nodded, desperate.
Clara yanked the gag from her mouth. Why?
Sue raspte.
Let's a kids go. Warte is, take it out on me. Tom's grin widened. The Travers family stash, Grandpa's silver unicorn locket. You've got it, don't you? James loved you too much to send you off empty-handed. Locket? What locket?
Sue spottat.
I ain't heard of no treasure. If I had it, you think I'd be starving in a shack with 2 kids? Tom scoffed, twirling his blade. Don't play dumb. He nodded at Buck, who lunged toward Jimmy.
No. Sue screamed.
I swear I don't know. Kill us, you'll get nothing. He's your nephew, Tom. Ain't you afraid of God's wrath? Clara whispered something in Tom's ear. He grunted, then barked, basement. They dragged Sue, Jimmy, and Minnie to a trapdoor, down into a damp, stinking cellar. Buck lit a torch, and Sue's breath caught. A skeletal figure slumped against the wall, chained, filthy, hollow-eyed. Tom sneered, "Say hi, big brother." Sue's world tilted.
James. Tom lauk het. Surprise. Où?
Thought he was bear food? Nah, he's been down here 10 years. Crazy or faking it, I don't care. But he won't cough up the locket. James's head snapped up, eyes blazing. 10 years, Tom. Torturing me wasn't enough. Now my wife and kids? That locket mean more than family? You've got the farm, ain't that plenty?
Tom roaret. Plenty?
Business tanked. Farms bled dry. You owe me, James. Hand over the locket, or your precious 4 meet the devil tonight. Minnie included, poor adopted stray. James spat, take him to Pa's study. They hauled everyone upstairs. James fumbled with a loose floorboard, revealing a hollow. Inside, the silver unicorn locket, plus a stash of gold coins and silver bars.
Tom and Clara whoopt, Eis wild.
You and Pa hid this from me. Tom snarled. James coughed, weak. Was for emergencies, not greed. Let us go, I don't want a dime. Tom hesitated. James was still his brother. But Clara hissed, finish it. Buck didn't blink. His knife sank into Tom's chest. Hank, spooked, bolted for the door, but Buck cut him down too. Tom gurgled, Clara, help, she smirked. Help? I've waited a decade for this. Clara grabbed Buck's arm. Rest's yours, lover. James slumped, whispering, should have trusted you, Sue. Buck advanced, blade raised. Sue shielded the kids, helpless. Then Minnie, brave little Minnie, wriggled free and threw herself at Buck. The knife caught her instead.
She komplet, bloot pooling.
Clara and Buck froze, stunned.
August wippet trug ze rum.
The granny appeared, eyes like thunder. Sue cried, save Minnie, save James. The granny waved a hand. Buck and Clara slammed into the wall, pinned. James'll live, she said. Minnie's gone, her fate sealed. But you should know, she's their daughter. She pointed at Buck and Clara. Clara gasped. The granny tossed her a bundle, Minnie's baby clothes, a jade pendant Clara recognized. Truth crashed down. Minnie was the child Clara bore with Buck before marrying Tom, abandoned at birth. Buck, the hired man, had been her lover all along. They'd killed James's ma, staged it as suicide, then plotted to wipe out the Travers line for the loot. Clara broke. My baby, she wailed, lunging at Buck with his own knife. He crumpled, dead. She smashed her head against the wall, gone in a bloody heap. Sue sobbed, save Minnie, she's mine too. The granny shook her head. Her path's done. But she'll find you again, different like. Get Jimmy out, he's seen too much. I'll wipe it clean. James, revived, scooped up a trembling Jimmy. Sue followed, dazed. The granny waved. Jimmy's eyes fluttered shut. He'll wake tomorrow, she said, remembering Pa, not this mess. Sue stammered, who are you? The granny's face shifted. Ma Travers, James's mother, smiled back, then faded. Sue and James stumbled out of the blood-soaked house, Jimmy limp in his father's arms. Sue's mind reeled. Ma Travers, the granny, had saved them, but Minnie was gone. She glanced back, half expecting to see the old woman's ghost, but the night was still. Thank you, she whispered, tears streaking her face. James, gaunt but alive, squeezed her shoulder. We're together now. That's what matters. They fetched Mary Lister from her cabin the next day. She'd refused to leave Willow Hollow, but Sue wouldn't let her stay alone, not after Hank's treachery. Mary settled in with them, a makeshift grandma to Jimmy. James took the reins of the Travers farmstead again, rebuilding what Tom and Clara had squandered. The silver unicorn locket and the stash stayed locked away. No one needed that kind of trouble again. Sue poured her heart into James and Jimmy, fiercer than ever. A year later, she gave birth to a girl, Lydia. When Sue first held her, she froze. Lydia's tiny face mirrored Minnie's, down to the dimpled chin. James saw it too, his eyes misting. She's back, Sue murmured. They never spoke of it aloud, but the feeling stuck. Minnie had found them, like the granny promised. The Travers family thrived. Jimmy grew tall, his memory of that awful night scrubbed clean, replaced with a boy's joy at having his pa back. Lydia was a spitfire, sharp and kind like her lost sister. Sue and James, weathered but unbroken, leaned on each other. They took Ma Travers' words to heart, good begets good, and lived it out. They fixed trails, built bridges, fed the hungry, and helped folks like Mary when times got lean. Word spread, the Traverses were a blessing to Willow Hollow. That's the end of Sue's story, folks, a wild ride through betrayal, loss, and redemption. Stick around, 'cause I've got another tale brewing. This one's a doozy from the American frontier, think 1750s, out in the Tennessee hills. Next up, Zvidosvo. Picture this, an upright fella named Caleb Wheeler, rich as sin and straight as an arrow, but with one flaw, he couldn't keep his eyes off a pretty face. In a dusty little town called Pine Bluff, Caleb's about to tangle with a widow who's more trouble than she's worth. An old beggar woman warns him to dig up a grave and wash away a wrong. Sounds grim, right? Let's dive in. Back in Pine Bluff, Caleb Wheeler was the kind of man folks looked up to. Honest, generous, owned half the land from here to Knoxville. Only hitch? He had a wandering eye. A beautiful woman crossed his path, and he'd stare like a hound at a bone. If she was single, he'd charm his way into her life, no questions asked. One crisp fall afternoon, Caleb rode out to Grass Creek Hollow with his hired hand, Amos, to collect rent from his tenants. Times were tough, drought had scorched the crops, leaving fields barren. Most folks couldn't pay a dime. Caleb, soft-hearted as he was rich, cut their rent in half and gave him extra time. Don't fret, he told them, we'll get through this. The tenants praised him like a saint, shaking his hand till it hurt. With the day's work done, Caleb and Amos headed for home. At the edge of the hollow, a young woman stepped into view, hauling a water jug. She was a looker, graceful, with a face that'd stop a man cold. Caleb recognized her, Ellie Harper, new bride of Luke Harper, a tenant he'd met 6 months back. He'd kept his distance then, married women were off limits, even for him. But now, with no one else around, he stole a few extra glances. Ellie caught his eye and smiled. Ellie Harper set her jug down and walked toward Caleb Wheeler, her smile warm as a summer breeze. "Afternoon, Mr. Wheeler," she called. "You here collecting rent from us folks?" Caleb tipped his hat, trying not to stare too long. Yeah. Heard from your ma-in-law your crops didn't make it this year. Couldn't pay if you tried. I cut Luke's rent in half, gave him till spring. Figure you were down at the creek washing, so you might not be heard yet. No need to fret now." Ellie's eyes lit up, gratitude plain as day. "Well, bless your heart, Mr. Wheeler. Tat's mich die Kind. We've had a rough spell. Luke, my husband, he up and died 2 days back. Sick as a dog, gone overnight. Me and his ma buried him up the ridge yesterday. Don't know how we'll manage now. A few tears slipped down her cheek, and she brushed them away quick. Caleb's jaw dropped. Luke? Dead? He was built like an ox. How's that happen? Ellie sighed, voice trembling. Came on sudden fever, stinking sores all over. Woke up to him cold beside me. Guess the Lord's got his own plans. Amos, Caleb's hired hand, piped up, squinting at her. If Luke's gone, why not marry again? You're young, pretty, don't have to stick it out alone.
Ellie shook her head, fierce.
Luke's ma raised me like her own when we wed. Now he's gone, I can't leave her high and dry. I'll see her through her days. Amos nodded, impressed. That's real decent of you. Caleb, though, couldn't peel his eyes off her. Pretty as a picture and good-hearted too, he thought. Compared to his 6 wives back in Pine Bluff, nagging, greedy lot, this Ellie Harper was a diamond in the rough. If I could make her mine. Next morning, Caleb loaded up a sack of cornbread and dried beans, hitched his horse, and rode back to Grass Creek Hollow. Luke's pa had passed years ago, leaving just Ellie and her mother-in-law, Widow Bess Harper, in that creaky cabin. Ellie answered his knock, her face brightening like the sun breaking through clouds. Mr. Wheeler. What brings you back so soon? Brought you and Bess some victuals, Caleb said, hefting the sack. Heard you're short on food after the drought. This ain't charity, just neighborly. Take it, no strings. Ellie's hands flew to her cheeks, then she grabbed the goods with a grin. You're a saint, Mr. Wheeler. A real live saint. Caleb chuckled, brushing it off. Nah, just doing what's right. Widow Bess shuffled out, drawn by their voices. When she saw the food, her wrinkled face split into a smile. God bless you, Caleb Wheeler. Caleb seized the chance to linger, chatting him up, even pitching in with chores, chopping wood, fixing a leaky roof. Ellie didn't bat an eye at him hanging around, and Bess seemed to turn a blind eye too. After a few hours, Caleb's gut told him he had a shot. For 3 days straight, he showed up with gifts, flour, smoked ham, a bolt of cloth. By the 3rd day, he worked up the nerve to take Ellie's hand. She didn't pull away, just smiled soft and shy. Emboldened, Caleb pressed closer, and she leaned into him. That night, he stayed late, and under the flicker of a tallow candle, they crossed a line. Ellie giggled and sighed, no hint of regret. Caleb was over the moon, hooked, line and sinker. But dawn brought a reckoning. As Caleb slipped out the cabin door, Widow Bess caught him red-handed. You scoundrel, she bellowed, grabbing his coat. My boy's barely cold, and you're sniffing around his wife? How's she supposed to face folks now? Caleb, drunk on last night's bliss, pleaded, Bess, keep it hush, nobody's gotta know. I'm sweet on Ellie. Let me make it right, I'll marry her. Bess snorted, arms crossed. Marry her? Easy to say, harder to do. What'll your kin say, 6 wives already, and you chasing a 7th? Prove it, or I'm dragging you to the magistrate.
Caleb doubled down.
If you're agreeable, she won't be my main wife, but number 7's plenty good. I'll settle it. Bess wasn't sold. Words are cheap. Ellie's a good girl. Show me you mean it. Cough up some cash first. Done, Caleb said. I'll deed you 2 acres of my rental land. No rent, ever.
Plus $100 silver. House set.
Bess's grip loosened, eyes glinting. Better keep that promise.
Fetch the deed and the money, now.
Caleb nodded. Ellie, he called inside, I'm coming back for you. Wait for me, I'll send a wagon this afternoon. He bolted off, head spinning with plans. Halfway to Pine Bluff, he passed old Widow Jane, a beggar woman hobbling along with a stick and a cracked bowl. She nodded at him, white hair wild. Years back, her man rented from Caleb too, hard times hit, and Caleb eased up on him. Now she scraped by, begging.
Mr. Wheeler, she croaked, watch yourself.
That Harper house ain't right. Caleb waved her off, too giddy to listen.
Caleb Wheeler rode back to Pine Bluff. Es mein butzing like a behive.
Marrying Ellie Harper, number 7, meant stirring up a hornet's nest at home, but he didn't care. He'd promised Widow Bess land and cash, and he aimed to deliver. By noon, he'd rounded up the deed for 2 acres, a pouch of silver dollars, and a spare bolt of calico for good measure. His 6 wives, though, weren't about to let this slide quiet. The minute Caleb spilled his plan, the house erupted. His first wife, Martha, led the charge, 5 others hot on her heels.
Another wife?
"You've lost your damn mind, Caleb Wheeler," she hollered. "We're barely keeping this roof up, and you're chasing skirts again?" The yelling bounced off the rafters. 6 voices, 1 big headache. Caleb squared his shoulders.
This ain't your call.
"I'm the man here. I've got plenty food, cloth, gold in the strongbox. I'm taking it to Grass Creek Hollow, and I'll live with Ellie fair and square." He stormed out, loaded a wagon, and hightailed it back to Ellie's cabin. Widow Bess took the goods with a smug nod. No fuss from her now. Caleb figured he'd won. But back home, his wives stewed. 5 days of sulking turned into a truce. They piled into a cart and rolled up to Grass Creek, hats in hand. "We're sorry, Caleb," Martha said, voice tight. "Come home, run things right. We won't meddle no more." Caleb saw his chance. "Good. I'm bringing Ellie in as number 7. Y'all okay with that?" They grumbled but nodded, cornered and out of fight. Word spread fast. Caleb Wheeler was taking another bride. Pine Bluff buzzed, and Grass Creek folks started cozying up to Ellie and Bess, hoping to curry favor with the big man. Old Widow Jane, though, wasn't clapping. She caught Caleb at the hollow's edge the day before the wedding, her bony hand clutching her stick. "Mr. Wheeler, you forgot what I told you. That Ellie Harper and Widow Bess ain't no good. Trouble's coming if you hitch up with her."
Mark my words, calamity's knocking.
Caleb brushed her off, grinning. "Jane, I've got this. Thanks for the worry, but I'm set."
See you round.
He figured she was just a nosy old bat, maybe jealous of Bess's windfall. Next morning, Caleb didn't waste time. He hired a flower-decked wagon, saddled his best horse, and rode to Grass Creek Hollow like a king. Half the town turned out, Pine Bluff elders, Grass Creek tenants, all come to cheer the union. Bess raked in more silver and a chest of trinkets from the deal, grinning ear to ear. The Wheeler house brimmed with guests, fiddles wailing, and whiskey flowing. Caleb worked the crowd till dusk, sweat beading his brow. Finally, the lamps flickered low, and it was time. Ellie waited in the bridal room, veil still on, alone. Caleb's pulse raced. He'd been dreaming of this all day. He burst in, voice booming, "Darlin', your man's here." Ellie giggled, soft and teasing. "Took you long enough, mister, I've been pining." She lifted her veil, pouting playfully. Caleb swooped in, all apologies. "Too many folks out there, sugar. I'll make it up to you tonight, promise." He pulled her close, tumbling onto the bed. Ellie let out a little yelp, then a sharp cry, then nothing. Her eyes rolled back, legs twitched once, and she went limp. Caleb froze, panic clawing his gut. He pressed a hand to her nose, no breath. "Ellie," he gasped, shaking her. Dead as a doornail. "How?" He'd barely touched her. The door banged open. Widow Bess stormed in with 2 burly tenants, eyes blazing. "Ellie, what's wrong, girl?" She knelt, checked Ellie's pulse, then whirled on Caleb.
She's gonna.
"What did you do, you bastard?" Caleb stammered, I didn't. She just stopped. We were talking, then this. Bess wouldn't hear it. "You killed her, Wheeler. Murderer." She grabbed his shirt, screaming for the tenants to fetch the sheriff. "We're hauling you to justice." Caleb's knees buckled. He'd faced down bears, but the law scared him spitless. "Bess, please," he begged, dropping to the floor. "I swear I didn't hurt her. Something else did this. Let's figure it out. I'll pay you $500, take her home tomorrow, and we hush it up. Spare me the gallows." Bess's eyes narrowed, calculating. 500? My Ellie's worth more than that. She was a gem, you snuffed her out. Make it 1,000, plus a box of gold trinkets, and I'll let it slide. Caleb, sweating bullets, agreed. Should have listened to Jane, he cursed himself. That night, his folks smothered the news. By morning, Bess and the tenants hauled Ellie's body off, wrapped in a tarp, like nothing happened. Caleb Wheeler holed up in Pine Bluff after Ellie's death, a shaken man. He dodged the sheriff, but the guilt gnawed at him. 5 days of hiding, no swagger left. Then came a knock. Old Widow Jane stood there, stick in hand, her sharp eyes boring into him. "I need to talk, Caleb Wheeler," she said, firm as iron. Caleb didn't want company, but Jane's name rang a bell. He owed her this much. He ushered her into the parlor, shutting the door tight. Before he could speak, tears hit. He grabbed her arm, voice breaking. "Jane, why'd you warn me off Ellie that night?
Did you know I'd get cursed like this?"
Jane didn't flinch. "Caleb, round up some boys and shovels. We're heading to Grass Creek Hollow now." "No nonsense, just orders." Caleb obeyed, half-dazed, and they rode out with Amos and 2 tenants in tow. At Luke Harper's old cabin, the place was a ghost town. Door ajar, rooms stripped bare, not a stick of furniture or speck of value left. Widow Bess was gone too. Caleb gaped. What in tarnation? Where'd they go? Jane's laugh was cold. That Harper clan, Luke, Ellie, Bess, they played you like a fiddle. Took your money and ran.
Scarlet you'd catch on.
Played me. Caleb's head spun. Luke's dead, Ellie too. I saw her stop breathing. Jane pointed up the ridge. If I told you Luke and Ellie ain't dead, would you believe me? That trio set you up, start to finish. Don't buy it? Dig up Luke's grave, see for yourself. Caleb's gut churned, but he grabbed a shovel. The boys followed, hacking at the rocky soil till they hit the coffin. They pried it open, nothing but a busted straw mat inside. No Luke. Lord Almighty, Caleb muttered. They're alive. Jane nodded, grim.
Here is the truth, son.
I didn't know Luke faked it at first. I've lived in Grass Creek nigh on 40 years though, and I pegged Ellie and Bess for trouble from the jump. That day Ellie sweet-talked you at the hollow's edge. I saw her reeling you in. Warned you twice, but you wouldn't hear it. I had no proof till last night. Caught Luke alive as you, driving a wagon with Ellie and Bess, loaded with your loot. That's when it clicked, they conned you good. Caleb's knees buckled. So Ellie didn't die? How'd she pull that off? Jane's tale was hazy but damning, enough to light a fire under him. That same day, he stormed the county courthouse, spilling the whole mess to the magistrate. The law didn't dawdle, runners fanned out, tracking the Harpers. A month later, they dragged Luke, Ellie, and Bess back from a hideout in Lincoln County, hauled them before the judge in chains.
Under the gaffel, it all came out.
Luke and Ellie weren't content scratching a living from rented land. When they heard Caleb, the rich skirt chaser, was due to collect, they hatched a plan to bleed him dry. Step 1, Luke faked his death. Some root called mockwort, 7 inches long, a dose per inch knocks you out a day. He took 2, played corpse, fooled the hollow. Step 2, Ellie, the grieving widow, hooked Caleb at the creek, playing damsel till he bit. Step 3, she let him court her, sealed the deal with a tumble, then let Bess catch him. Perfect leverage to force a wedding. Caleb, smitten silly, shelled out land and cash. But Ellie wasn't marrying for keeps, just the payoff. That wedding night, she dosed herself with mockwort, went stiff as a board. Bess swooped in, accused Caleb of murder, and squeezed him for $1,000 in trinkets to hush it up. With the loot in hand, the trio bolted, figuring Caleb'd never dig deeper. He might not have, if Jane hadn't pushed. The judge threw the book. Luke got 10 years breaking rocks, Ellie and Bess 5 each in the workhouse. Caleb watched them carted off, a wiser man. Never again, he swore, no more chasing pretty faces. Back in Pine Bluff, he settled into a quiet life, his 6 wives relieved to have him tame. That's the tale of Caleb Wheeler, folks, greed, guile, and a grave that wasn't. Liked it? Drop a note below, subscribe, share it round. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time. Hey folks, Nancy Thompson here again, spinning another yarn from the wilds of the Tennessee hills. Caleb Wheeler's tale left us with a lesson about greed and gullibility, but the frontier's got more secrets up its sleeve. This one's called The Peddler's Curse, a twisty little number about a traveling trader, a deal gone sour, and a reckoning nobody saw coming. Let's set the stage. Back in Pine Bluff, same dusty town where Caleb licked his wounds. Meet Elias Crow, a wiry fellow with a sharp tongue and a sharper eye for a bargain. Elias wasn't rich like Caleb, just a peddler, roving the hollows with a mule-packed cart, trading pots, cloth, and trinkets for furs, moonshine, or whatever folks could spare. He'd roll into Pine Bluff every spring, a regular as the thaw, charming the women and bartering with the men. Folks liked him well enough, till they didn't. See, Elias had a knack for stretching the truth. That rusty kettle? Good as new, he'd swear. That moth-eaten blanket? Woven by Cherokee hands, he'd claim, hiking the price. Most let it slide. Frontier life's hard, and a little hustle kept a man fed. But trouble brewed when Elias crossed paths with widow Ruth Tanner, a tough old bird living out past Grass Creek Hollow. Ruth's husband, Jed, died in a logging accident 3 winters back, leaving her a ramshackle cabin and a teenage son, Ben. She was no pushover, knew how to haggle, skin a deer, and stare down a bear. One muddy April day, Elias trundled up her path, his mule snorting under the load. "Morning, Widow Tanner," he called, tipping a battered hat. "Got something special today, prime goods for a fine lady like you." Ruth leaned on her porch rail, squinting. "Special, huh? Last time, you sold me a silver spoon that turned green in a week. What's the catch now?" Elias grinned, undeterred, and pulled a small carved wooden box from his cart. "No catch, Mom. This here's a genuine relic, found it in a trapper's cache-up near Cumberland Gap. Open it." She did. Inside sat a tarnished brass ring, etched with swirls that caught the light. "Ain't much to look at," Ruth grunted. Elias leaned in, voice low. "It's more'n it seems. Old trapper swore it's cursed, or blessed, depending who wears it. Said it saved his hide from a Shawnee arrow once. I'll part with it cheap, 2 jugs of your corn liquor and a fox pelt." Ruth snorted. "Cursed? Sounds like hogwash. My Ben could use a laugh though. Give you 1 jug and a coonskin, take it or leave it." Elias haggled, but Ruth held firm. Deal struck, he pocketed the goods and handed over the ring. "Wear it wise," he winked, then rolled off whistling. Ben, 16 and lanky, slipped the ring on that night, joking, "Maybe it'll make me bulletproof, Ma." Ruth chuckled, until dawn, when Ben woke screaming, clawing at his hand. The ring wouldn't budge, fused to his finger like it had grown there. His skin around it blistered red, and his eyes went wild. "It's burning me, Ma, get it off." Ruth tried soap, grease, even a knife. Nothing worked. By noon, Ben was feverish, babbling about voices in the trees. Ruth saddled her horse and tore off for Pine Bluff, hunting Elias. She found him at the tavern, haggling over a sack of nails. "Crow," she roared, slamming the bar. "That damn ring's killing my boy. What did you do?"
Elias Pallet.
"Killing him? It's just a trinket, Ruth, I swear." She grabbed his collar, dragging him outside. "You're coming with me, peddler. Fix this, or I'll skin you myself." The tavern crowd watched, murmuring. Elias's silver tongue wouldn't save him now. Ruth Tanner hauled Elias Crow out of the Pine Bluff Tavern by his scruffy collar, her grip like a bear trap. The peddler's boots skidded in the mud as he sputtered, "Ruth, I swear, it's just a ring. I didn't know it'd hurt the boy." She didn't blink, shoving him toward her horse. "Save your breath, Crow. You're fixing this, or I'll bury you next to that cart of yours." A crowd trailed him to the hitching post, half curious, half itching for a fight, but Ruth's glare sent him scattering. She tied Elias's wrists with a rawhide strap, slung him over the saddle like a sack of meal, and climbed up front. "Move an inch, and I'll knock you cold," she warned, spurring the horse toward Grass Creek Hollow. Elias squirmed, his mule braying after them, but he knew better than to test her. Ruth's mind raced. Ben's screams echoed in her skull, that cursed ring searing his finger. She'd skin Elias alive if her boy didn't pull through. By dusk, they reached her cabin. Ben lay sprawled on a straw pallet, sweat-soaked and thrashing. The ring gleamed dull brass, its swirls pulsing like they had a heartbeat. His hand was a mess, skin bubbled up, red and raw, creeping past his knuckles. "Ma," he moaned, voice hoarse, "it's talking, telling me to do things." Ruth's stomach dropped. She cut Elias loose and shoved him forward. "See that? Undo it now." Elias gaped, hands trembling. I don't know how. Trapper said it was magic, not this." Ruth's fist clenched. "Magic? You sold me a devil's trinket, you lying snake. Where'd you get it?" Elias stammered. "Up near Cumberland Gap, old fella, half dead, traded it for a blanket. Said it saved him once, but he wouldn't wear it no more. That's all I got." Ruth grabbed a hatchet from the wall.
Jure gonna pray, peddler. Pray hard. Kosif bendis jure next.
She turned to her son, prying at the ring with a knife tip. It wouldn't budge, metal bit into flesh like it had welded there. Ben howled, eyes rolling back. Elias dropped to his knees, muttering, "Lord, I didn't mean no harm," Ruth spat. "Your Lord ain't listening."
Get up, help me.
Desperate, she hauled Ben outside, dunking his hand in the creek. Cold water did nothing, the blisters spread. Elias hovered useless, till Ruth barked, "Fetch that box it came in, maybe there's a trick." He scrambled back, digging through his cart. The wooden box sat there, carved with the same swirls.
Elias kriegt IT open. No klus, just a faint whiff of rot.
"Nothing," he croaked, holding it out. Ruth snatched it, turning it over. A scratch on the bottom caught her eye, a jagged mark, like a claw. "What's this?" she demanded.
Elias shrugged. Pale.
Dunno, didn't see it before. Ben's cries sharpened, words spilling out, garbled and strange. "Blood, needs blood," Ruth froze. "What's he saying?" Elias backed up. I ain't staying for this." He bolted for his mule, but Ruth tackled him flat.
You ain't running, coward.
Just then, a shadow moved at the tree line, an old woman bent and gray, hobbling with a gnarled cane. Her voice rasped like dry leaves. "Trouble, Widow Tanner?" Ruth spun, hatchet raised. "Who are you?"
The woman stepped closer, eyes glinting.
"Call me Granny Moss."
Hurt the boys weil's a mile off.
"That ring's no trinket, it's a blood debt, bound to whoever wears it." Ruth's grip tightened.
Blut debt?
"Speak plain." Granny Moss nodded at Ben. "Old magic, Shawnee, maybe older.
Vera Preis a Preis, ore Tages, slow.
You've got till moonrise to break it, or he's gone." Elias whimpered, "I didn't know." Ruth rounded on him. "You brought this plague here, help me fix it, or I'll feed you to it." Granny Moss chuckled, low and dark.
Fixing's costly, Vido. Ready to pay. Ruth Tanner loomed over Elias Crow. Her hatchet glinting in the fading, lightest Granny Moss words hung heavy. Costly, you say? Name your price, old woman. I ain't losing my boy.
Ben writhed on the ground, the brass ring pulsing like a live coal, his fevered mutters, "Blood, blood," cutting through the dusk. Elias cowered, pinned under Ruth's boot, his face a mask of terror. Granny Moss hobbled closer, her cane tapping the dirt. "Ain't my price, widow, it's the rings. Blood bound it, blood'll loose it. Shawnee trappers forged it long ago, cursed it to guard their kin. Wearer lives if they spill for it, or it drinks 'em dry. Your Ben's caught, 'cause he don't know the right." Ruth's eyes narrowed. "Spill what? Speak straight." "Life," Granny said, flat. "A drop might have held it off, slit a finger, feed it daily. But it's dug in now. Takes a full trade, one soul for his, before the moon's high." She pointed west, where the sky bled orange. 2 hours, maybe less. Ruth's breath hitched. "One soul? You mean kill somebody?" Granny nodded, slow. "That's the debt. Ring don't care who, just needs the red." Elias squawked, thrashing. "Not me. I didn't know, Ruth, you can't." She stomped his chest, silencing him. "Shut it, peddler. You brought this, might be you pays." She turned to Granny Moss. "There's gotta be another way, herbs, prayers, something." The old woman shook her head. "Tried water, didn't you? It's blood or bust. Choose quick, boy's fading." Ben's skin was gray now, the blisters snaking up his arm. Ruth dropped the hatchet, hands shaking. "I ain't no murderer, but I ain't letting him die neither." She scanned the hollow, trees, creek, Elias's cart. Her gaze landed on the mule, tied and snuffling. "What about that? Beast's got blood, will it take an animal?" Granny Moss tilted her head, eyeing the mule. "Might. Old rights used deer bear, mules close enough. Ring's hungry, not picky. Slit its throat, soak his hand in it, see if it drinks." Elias yelped, "Not Betsy. She's Ali got." Ruth whirled, grabbing his throat. "Your mule or my boy, Pick fast or it's you bleeding. Elias choked, nodding frantic. Ruth dragged him to the cart, untying Betsy's rope.
Ze Mule stampt, Sensing trabbel.
Hold her, Ruth snapped, fetching the hatchet. Elias gripped the reins, tears streaking his dirt-caked face. She's been with me 10 years, Ruth ignored him, steeling herself. Ben, hang on, Ma's fixing this.
She reise ze bled. Betsy bret, lut and pitiful. Von swing, and blot spret, hot and tick.
The mule crumpled, soaking the dirt. Ruth hauled Ben's limp arm over, pressing the ring into the pooling red. For a heartbeat, nothing, then the brass flared, swirls glowing like embers. Ben gasped, arching, as the blister shrank, the ring loosening just a hair. It's working! Ruth cried. Granny Moss watched, stone-faced. Keep it there, gotta drink its fill. Elias sobbed Betsy, but Ruth held firm, blood slicking her hands. Minutes crawled, Ben's breathing steadied, color creeping back. The ring dulled, slipping free at last, tumbling into the gore.
Ben blinked. Weak.
Ma, it's gone. Ruth scooped him up, hugging tight. You're safe, son. She glared at Elias. Your mule saved him, and you're damn lucky it did. Elias sank to his knees, staring at Betsy's carcass. Granny Moss picked up the ring, wiping it on her shawl. Debt's paid, this time. Keep it off, lest you want more trouble. She tossed it to Ruth.
Buri et dep, or bonite. Rusnaidid, klöchin ben.
Ain't nobody wearing that devil thing again. She turned to Elias, voice hard. You're done here, peddler. Take your cart and git. Don't ever show your face in Grass Creek again. Elias staggered up, hollow-eyed. I'm ruined, all for a trinket, Granny Moss chuckled, turning away. Greed's a steep toll, boy. Moon's rising, best be gone. The moon climbed high over Grass Creek Hollow, casting silver across the blood-soaked dirt where Betsy's body lay still. Ruth Tanner cradled Ben on the cabin porch, his breathing steady now, the cursed ring clutched in her fist. Elias Crow stood by his cart, a broken man, mule gone, spirit crushed. Granny Moss lingered at the edge of the clearing, her shadow long and crooked, cane tapping like a metronome. Ruth stood, brushing Ben's hair back. You're staying put, son, rest up. She marched to Elias, the ring glinting in her hand. This ain't over till it's gone for good. You're helping me bury it, deep where no fool dig it up. Elias flinched, voice hoarse. Ruth, I've lost everything, ain't that enough? She thrust the ring at him. Not till this devil's locked away. Move. Granny Moss cut in, rasping, burying's wise, but it'll whisper still, curses don't sleep easy. Mark the spot, widow, or it'll call another. Ruth nodded grim, grabbing a shovel from the shed.
Elias, dich.
He obeyed, hands trembling, carving a hole near the creek bank, 3 feet down, then 4. Ruth dropped the ring in, spitting on it. Stay there, you hellspawn thing. They piled dirt, rocks, then a slab of slate from the hillside, sealing it tight. Ben watched from the porch, pale but alive. Ma, it's over, right? Ruth forced a smile. Over for us, Ben. You're safe, that's what counts. Elias slumped against his cart, staring at the mound. I didn't mean harm, just wanted a profit. Ruth's glare could have cut steel. Your profit near killed my boy. Take your junk and git. I see you again, I'll shoot first, ask later. Elias hitched his cart, mule-less now, and dragged it off by hand, shoulders hunched. The hollow swallowed his silhouette as he vanished down the trail. Granny Moss lingered, eyeing the grave. He's marked now, greed stain don't wash clean. Might be he'll find worse than you did. Ruth frowned. Worse? What's that mean?
The old woman shrugged, hobbling off. Moon knows.
I don't. Days turned to weeks. Ben mended slow, the blisters fading to scars, but he'd wake some nights, swearing he heard whispers from the creek, faint like wind through reeds. Ruth kept a rifle by the door, eyes sharp for any stranger. Word spread through Pine Bluff. Elias Crow was bad luck, a peddler who'd cursed the Tanners and paid dear. Folks shunned his name, and his cart never rolled back. Months later, a trapper staggered into town, wild-eyed, spinning a tale. He'd found a wrecked cart near Cumberland Gap, Elias's, no doubt, smashed to splinters, goods scattered. No body, just tracks leading into the woods, then nothing. By the wreckage, a brass ring glinted, swirls etched deep, crusted with dried blood. Ain't touching it, the trapper swore, leaving it where it lay. Pine Bluff buzzed. Some said Elias dug it up, others reckoned it dug itself out. Ruth heard the gossip when she rode in for salt, Ben at her side. "Ma, that's it, ain't it?" he whispered, voice tight. She gripped his shoulder. "Maybe. Don't matter, it's far off now." But her dreams turned dark, ringed hands reaching, Elias's pleas echoing. She'd checked the slate by the creek at dawn, finding it untouched, yet unease gnawed her. Granny Moss showed up one crisp morning, uninvited, leaning on her cane. "Heard the talk, widow?"
Ruth tenset. About Elias?
"Yeah, Ring got him." Granny's laugh was dry. "Got him or he got it, same end. Curse don't die, just waits. You paid your debt, he didn't. Keep that boy close, Moon still watching." She turned, vanishing into the trees, leaving Ruth with a chill she couldn't shake. Ruth and Ben stuck tight after that, working the land, living quiet. The hollow healed, but the creek ran cold, and folks swore they heard a mule bray some nights, faint and mournful. Elias Crow faded to a cautionary tale: don't deal in what you don't understand. Ruth kept her promise. No stranger crossed her threshold without a hard stare and a loaded gun. That's the peddler's curse, folks, a lesson in greed and the shadows it wakes. Liked it? Drop a line below, share it round, subscribe for more. Nancy Thompson, signing off. See you next tale. Hey there, Nancy Thompson back with another frontier yarn, straight from the Tennessee wilds of the 1750s. Pine Bluff's still buzzing from Elias Crow's vanishing, but trouble don't sleep in these hills. This one's called The Preacher's Shadow, a tale of faith, fear, and something dark trailing a man of God. Buckle up, folks, it's a bumpy ride.
Metre während Amos Blackwood, Arlene, hog alt priacher hu rollet into Pine Bluff von foggy Oktobermorn.
He wasn't your fire and brimstone type, spoke soft, with a voice like molasses, quoting scripture smooth as a hymn. Came from Virginia, he said, called west to save souls in the backwoods. Folks took to him quick. Pine Bluff hadn't seen a proper preacher since old Parson Gray keeled over 2 summers back. Amos set up in a clapboard chapel on the town's edge, built by volunteers in a week. Sundays, he'd preach mercy and redemption, his black coat flapping like crow wings, Bible worn soft in his hands. Off days, he'd ride a gray mare through the hollows, Red Hollow, Grass Creek, even up toward Cumberland Gap, visiting cabins, praying with the sick, baptizing kids in the creeks. A saint, they called him, till the whispers started. See, Amos had a shadow, literal-like. Folks swore they saw it move wrong, stretching too long at dusk, curling where it shouldn't, even when the sun was high. Widow Ruth Tanner, still jumpy from that cursed ring, spotted it first. She'd been hauling water from Red Hollow Spring when Amos rode by, tipping his hat. "Afternoon, sister," he said, all smiles. Ruth nodded back, then froze, his shadow on the dirt twisted, sprouting horns for a blink before snapping back. She kept it hush till market day, when she cornered Caleb Wheeler, now a cautious man after Ellie's scam, at the general store. "Caleb, you seen the preacher's shadow?" she muttered low. Caleb frowned, scratching his beard. "Ain't noticed, Ruth. He's been by, blessing my fields, good man." Ruth gripped her basket. "Good maybe, but something's off. Watch him close." Caleb shrugged. "Fool me once," he figured, "but a preacher?" Others chimed in slow. Little Jenny Pike, 10 and fearless, swore she saw Amos's shadow grab a chicken by the chapel one night, snatched it right off the ground, no hands, and the bird was gone come dawn. Old man Tate, half blind, grumbled his hound wouldn't go near the preacher, growled and tucked tail every time Amos passed. Pine Bluff buzzed quiet-like. Nobody wanted to call out a man of God, but unease crept in. Then came the storm.
Late November, thunder rollet heavy, lightning splitting oaks clean trug.
Amos preached that Sunday, voice rising over the rain pounding the chapel roof. "The Lord tests us, brothers, stand firm."
Mitzermon, a bolt hitze steple, crack like jutgmente.
Folks screamed, ducking, but Amos stood tall, unruffled. When the smoke cleared, the steeple was scorched and his shadow, plain as day on the wall, flared twice its size, jagged and wrong before shrinking back. After service, Ruth cornered him outside, rain dripping off her bonnet. "Reverend, what's trailing you?"
"That shadow ain't natural. Don't lie to me."
Amos's smile faltered, eyes darting. "Sister Ruth, you're weary. Storms play tricks. Trust in the Lord, not fancies." She stepped closer, voice steel. "I've seen curses before, lost a mule to one."
"Spill it, or I'll rise hell till you Donnerstag."
Amos sighed, glancing at the woods. "Not here. Red Hollow, tomorrow, dusk. Bring who you trust, but keep it tight." Ruth nodded, wary. She'd face down Elias Crow's mess. Whatever shadowed this preacher, she'd stare it down too. Next day, she rounded up Caleb and Granny Moss, the old wise woman who'd broke Ben's curse. The trio rode out, rifles slung, ready for truth or trouble. Dusk settled over Red Hollow like a shroud, the sky bruising purple as Ruth Tanner, Caleb Wheeler, and Granny Moss rode in. The air hung thick, pine scent mixing with damp earth, crickets chirping uneasy. Ruth gripped her rifle, eyes scanning the trees. Caleb rode beside her, quieter since his run-in with Ellie Harper, but steady, his musket rested easy across his lap. Granny Moss trailed, her gray shawl blending with the gloom, cane thumping the trail like a warning drum. They found Reverend Amos Blackwood by the spring, his gray mare tethered to a cedar. He stood still, black coat stark against the fading light, Bible tucked under his arm. His shadow stretched long across the mossy rocks. Too long, Ruth thought, and it flickered odd, like a candle in a draft. "You came," Amos said, voice low, turning slow. His face was tight, eyes hollowed. None of that preacher's calm left.
"Spit it out, Reverend." Ruth snapped, dismounting.
"What's dogging you? That shadow's got folks spooked, me included." Caleb swung down, nodding.
"Sehen enug quertings in These Hills, Priacha."
"If you're in trouble, best tell it straight." Granny Moss stayed astride, peering at Amos like she could see through him. "Boy's got a mark," she rasped. "Old and deep, ain't just a trick of light." Amos sighed, setting his Bible on a stump.
"Reckon I overuse it, Ruth."
"Ain't proud of it, been running from it since Virginia." He paced, shadow trailing. Sure enough, it bent where it shouldn't, curling like smoke. "Wasn't always a preacher. 10 years back, I was Amos Tate, just a gambler drunk, scraping by in Richmond. Fell in with a bad lot, thieves, card sharps. One night, we hit a trader's wagon, old man half Cherokee, hauling furs." Ruth's jaw tightened. "Robbery? You?" Amos nodded, grim. "He fought, pulled a knife. I shot him dead, first blood I ever spilled. Took his goods, but he had this pouch. Leather, stitched tight, warm to the touch. We pried it open. Inside was a black stone, smooth, carved with a cross and eyes. One of the boys laughed, said it was cursed. I kept it, figured it'd fetch a price." Granny Moss snorted. "Fool. That's no trinket, it's a soul anchor."
"Cherokee blood magic, bound to the dead."
"You killed him, it latched to you." Amos flinched. Didn't know till later. "Next day, my shadow changed, moved on its own, whispered at night. The gang turned up dead, one drowned, one fell off a roof, one just stopped breathing. I ran, ditched the stone in a river. Thought it'd end." Caleb crossed his arms. "Didn't, huh?" Amos shook his head. "Kept following. Found a preacher in Norfolk. Old man took me in, cleaned me up. Said I'd sinned, but God could forgive if I served. Been preaching since, hoping good works'd shake it. Came west to start fresh, thought I'd outrun it." Ruth stepped closer, rifle up. "Ain't outrun nothing. Jenny Pike saw it snatch a chicken. Folks say it's growing. What's it want?" Amos's voice cracked. "Me. Been quiet till Red Hollow, then it stirred. Night I got here, dreamed of the old man, eyes black pointing. Woke with scratches on my chest, bleeding. It's mad I threw the stone away, wants it back or me dead."
Granny Moss slid off her horse, hobbling over.
"Stone's gone, but the debt ain't. Killed its maker, now it's your keeper. Feeds on guilt, grows on sin. You're a walking grave, preacher." Ruth scowled. "So it'll kill him, and what? Take us with it. Granny shook her head. Not if he pays. Blood started it, blood ends it. His willing, or it'll hunt till he's dust. Caleb rubbed his neck. Hell, Amos, you've preached mercy, now you're saying sacrifice yourself? Amos stared at the spring, water glinting dark. Thought I could save souls to save mine. Reckon I was wrong. A rustle broke the silence. Wind, or something else. His shadow swelled, splitting into two, one Amos-shaped, one taller, horned, eyes glowing faint red on the ground. Ruth aimed her rifle. That it? Amos nodded, pale. It's here, always is, closer now. Granny Moss gripped her cane. Time's short, Priacha. Spill your blood or we fight it, and we might not win. The air in Red Hollow thickened as Amos Blackwood's shadow split and loomed, its horned half pulsing with those eerie red eyes. Ruth Tanner cocked her rifle, heart hammering, aiming at the dirt where it stretched. Stay back, whatever you are. Caleb Wheeler flanked her, musket raised, sweat beading despite the chill. Granny Moss gripped her cane two-handed, muttering something old and sharp under her breath. Cherokee words, maybe, or older. Amos stood frozen by the spring, coat flapping, his own shadow trembling like a trapped thing. It's coming, Amos whispered, voice raw. Ain't no running now. The horned shadow slid closer, silent but heavy. Air felt like molasses, pressing down. Ruth fired. A crack split the dusk, dirt exploding where the eyes glowed. The shadow flinched, rippling, but didn't fade. Damn it, she hissed, reloading. Caleb shot next. Lead punched the ground, and the thing hissed, a sound like steam off a kettle, but held firm. Granny Moss steppet forward. Keine Stabing ze us. Bullets won't kill it, bound to him, not us. Preacher, you've gotta pay or it takes us all. Amos's knees buckled, but he nodded, fumbling a knife from his belt. Blood, you said, mine? Granny's eyes glinted. Willing blood, cut deep, give it what you stole. Might break the anchor, send it back. Ruth grabbed his arm. You sure, Amos? Eint no priacha aukta die vor us in 10 years kult. He met her gaze, steady for once. Sinned plenty, Ruth. Killed a man, ran from it. Preaching don't erase that. If it's me or you folks, I'll pay. The shadow lunged, claws of black snaked toward Caleb, who stumbled back, cursing. Ruth swung her rifle but, smacking it, it recoiled, hissing louder. Do it now. Granny barked. Amos slashed his palm, blood welling fast, dripping to the dirt. The shadow froze, eyes flaring, then slithered to the red pool, lapping it like a hound. Amos gritted his teeth, cutting deeper, blood flowed thick, soaking his sleeve. Take it, he rasped. Take me, leave MB. The horned shape swelled, towering over him, then dove, sinking into his chest like ink into water. Amos screamed, dropping the knife, clutching his heart. His shadow, both halves, snapped back, normal-sized, but he crumpled, gasping. Ruth rushed him, propping him up. Amos, you still with us? His eyes fluttered, breath ragged. It's gone. Felt it pull, then nothing. Caleb kicked the dirt where it had been. Gone? That quick. Granny Moss knelt, sniffing the blood-soaked ground. Not gone, fed. Debts half paid, bought you time, preacher, not freedom. Amos kuhit, pelestes. Time's enough, I'll take it. Ruth tore her shawl, binding his hand. You're a fool, but a brave one. Let's get you home. Caleb hoisted him up, muttering, Hell of a sermon, Reverend. They hauled him to his mare, the spring gurgling quiet behind. Granny lingered, eyeing the spot. Anchor's still in him, quiet, not dead. Next sin, it'll wake. Back in Pine Bluff, they propped Amos in the chapel, bandaged and weak. Word spread fast. Folks whispered he'd fought the devil and won, though Ruth kept the real tale tight. Jenny Pike peeked in, wide-eyed. Shadow's normal now, Miss Ruth. Think it's over? Ruth forced a grin. For now, Keat. Go on home. But at night, locking up, she saw it, Amos's shadow on the wall, still, but too sharp, like it was listening. Weeks passed. Amos preached again, softer now, leaning hard on mercy. Folks said he'd aged a decade overnight. Ruth checked in, rifle slung, Caleb trailing with goods. "Holding up?" she asked. Amos nodded, faint. "Long as I walk straight, it sleeps."
Pray I don't slip.
Granny Moss swung by once, cryptic as ever. "Shadow's patient, sins its meat. Watch him, widow."
Red Hollow stayed quiet. No whispers, no horns.
But Amos's mare shied some nights, and his hand scarred black where he'd cut, a cross etched deep. Pine Bluff called it a miracle, Ruth called it a truce. Either way, the preacher's shadow waited, and she'd be damned if it caught her napping. Winter bit hard into Pine Bluff, frost glazing the clapboard chapel where Reverend Amos Blackwood preached his quiet sermons. Weeks after the showdown in Red Hollow, he'd held on, pale, scarred but alive, his shadow tame on the surface. Ruth Tanner kept watch, rifle by her side, checking in with Caleb Wheeler's help. Granny Moss's warning, "Next sin it'll wake," stuck like burrs, and Amos's black cross scar on his hand pulsed faint some nights, a reminder of the debt half paid. Spring thawed the hills, and Amos grew steady. Preaching swelled the chapel, folks drawn to his weathered grace. "Mercy's all we've got," he'd say, voice soft, eyes distant. Ruth eased up, figuring the shadow'd settled. Maybe blood was enough. Caleb, ever practical, grumbled, "Long as he don't rob nobody again, we're fine." But Granny Moss, when she passed through, just squinted at Amos and shook her head. "It's patient, not gone." Then came the reckoning. Late March, a stranger rode into Pine Bluff, a grizzled trapper half-drunk, hauling a sack of pelts. He barged into the chapel mid-prayer, slurring, "Preacher, you owe me. Richmond, 10 years back, you cheated me at cards, ran off with my coin." Amos froze, Bible slipping. The trapper lunged, fists swinging, old sin crashing home. Ruth, in the pews, leapt up, tackling the man. "Back off, fool." Amos staggered, clutching his chest. I remember, Jed Coombs. I wronged him." His shadow twitched, sharp-horned, red eyes flaring on the wall. Folks screamed, scattering. Caleb barreled in, musket raised, but Ruth yelled, "Hold it, it's waking." The trapper gaped, fight draining as the shadow loomed, claws curling. Amos dropped to his knees, blood seeping from his scar. "Take me, finish it." Granny Moss burst through the door, cane thumping. Too late for that, preacher, sins lit the fuse. The shadow tore free, a black wraith, lunging at Amos. Ruth fired, shot passed through, splintering a pew. Caleb swung his gun stock. Nothing. Granny shoved past, chanting low, Cherokee words sharp as flint. The wraith hissed, turning, then dove for the trapper. Jed screamed once, swallowed whole, gone in a blink. The shadow shrank, sliding back to Amos, normal again. He slumped, gasping. "Why him?" Ruth demanded, rifle trembling. Granny spat, "Old debt," his blood tied it too. Anchor took the weaker soul, spared the penitent. Amos wept, hands shaking. "I called it back, my fault." Caleb hauled him up. "Fault or not, you're here." "He ain't." Pine Bluff reeled, Jed's vanishing hushed up quick, blamed on whiskey and bad luck. Amos preached one last time, voice broken. "I've no right to this pulpit, sins don't wash clean, just quiet." He left that night, gray mare plodding toward Cumberland Gap, shadow trailing short and still. Ruth watched him go, rifle slung. "Think it's done?" Caleb shrugged. "Hope so, tired of curses." Granny Moss lingered by the chapel, eyeing the trail. "Done till it ain't," he's marked, wandering. "Shadow's full now, but hunger don't die." She hobbled off, leaving Ruth with a chill. Months later, a trader swore he saw Amos near the gap, preaching to no one, shadow long but quiet. Pine Bluff moved on, chapel empty, folks wary of holy men with pasts. Ruth and Ben stayed put in Grass Creek Hollow, her rifle ever ready. Caleb tended his land, swearing off trouble. Red Hollow's spring ran clear, but some nights, a faint hiss echoed, shadow's echo, or just wind. Amos Blackwood faded to legend, a preacher who fought his sin and walked away, half saved, half damned. Ruth kept his Bible, left on the stump, its pages worn but warm. "Mercy's enough," she'd mutter, hoping he'd found it. That's the preacher's shadow, folks, a tale of guilt, grace, and what trails us in the dark. Liked it? Drop a note, share it round, subscribe for more. Nancy Thompson, signing off, till the next yarn.